Welcome to Straight from the Gavel. I'm your host, Dave Barber. Each and every week at this time, we like to visit with a member of the General Assembly and discuss the many things that are now going on here under the dome, especially now that the new session is underway. And it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome a most distinguished guest to Straight from the Gavel this day, House Minority Leader Brian Newberry. Leader Newberry, it's good to have you back.
Oh, hi, Dave. Thanks for having me back.
It probably doesn't seem like you had much time off because the 2011 session was kind of in two parts. You broke for a little while, then you came back and you dealt with the pension, and now you're starting right back in 2012. It's been a busy time for all of you folks.
Yeah, I feel like I spent more time here in 2011 than I did in 09 and 10 combined, between redistricting and the pension issues and the fact the session went late anyway.
Well, obviously, I heard most of the political pundits when they talked about political stories in 2011, they put the pension legislation right near the top of the list, if not the top news story in 2011. Looking back on that, give me your take, give me your assessment about the changes made in the state pension system.
Well, I don't know if the changes we made were the perfect solution, but they go a long way towards solving the pension issue at the state level. I know there's the municipal issues, we'll probably get into that, but it was something that had to be done. It's something that frankly should have been done years ago. You know, as a Republican, I have to point out that we've been saying this for years. Governor Allman said this back in 1995, and had the change been made 15 years ago, they wouldn't have been quite as painful. But at the end of the day, they were done, they're necessary, and they're going to strengthen the state's pension system and our fiscal situation going forward.
Well, yeah, a lot of people talked about it for a long time. Rhode Island was finally able to get something done about it. As a friend of mine used to like saying, if and buts were soup and nuts, every day would be Christmas. And it's certainly, looking back, it would have been good to have done it maybe sooner and not taken on all of those financial consequences. But you brought up another interesting good point. Now we have municipalities to deal with, and the municipalities were not addressed in this legislation. Is that going to be high on the agenda this coming session?
There's certain things I think we should be discussing that we probably won't, but of the issues that we're going to get into in this session, I would expect that will be at the top of the agenda. I mean, we had the meeting this week, with Governor Chafee, not me, but the mayors and the town administrators met with the governor to talk about the municipal plans. You know, one of the issues with the municipal plans is that the municipalities are different from each other. Not all municipalities, for example, have individual plans. The two towns I represent do not. We're all part of the state system. Some of the towns that have individual plans, like Lincoln, I've been told, they're in pretty good, sound financial footing. They don't really need a lot of changes or want a lot of changes. Others are in a different position. So it's not quite the same issue as the state system, which is why I think it wasn't addressed last year.
Well, speaking of cities and towns, the governor met with leaders of the various communities in Rhode Island to discuss some of the challenges they're facing. Obviously, monies from the state level have been cut back to cities and towns. They're crying, saying they need more help and more assistance. What do you think can be done?
Well, one of the problems, there's a political game being played here, not Democrat, Republican, but between the municipal leaders and the state leaders, and that's this. A lot of the things that can be done at the local level can and should be done by the local politicians, the mayors, the city councils, the town councils. A lot of it's done in contract negotiations, and a lot of it is stuff that they either don't want to do or don't want to be seen as having responsibility for doing it. So they're pointing to the state level and saying, look, we need these changes, and if you give us these changes, we'll do these things. And a lot of the things they're asking for are things they can do without us doing anything at all. So that gets a little bit interesting. On the other hand, there are things we can do for them. There's certainly some unfunded mandates that we could lift. There are certain requirements that they need to put into their contracts that we could do away with. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that negotiate the contracts with the local unions. So the responsibility is on them to negotiate good contracts, something that I think a lot of these cities and towns have not been doing over the years.
You touched on a big one, those mandates. Many of the mayors are suggesting that they need some relief from all of that. Do any particular mandates come to mind?
Well, actually, we've gotten rid of some in the last budget, and there are some mandated issues that we could deal with. But one of the issues about the mandate, I've been pushing about unfunded mandates myself all 3 years I've been here. But one of the problems is there are a lot of things that people perceive as mandates, and they're not. I'll give you an example. Minimum manning for firefighters, fire stations, is something that's always high on anybody's talking points list. There is no state mandate for minimum manning. That is something that's always been negotiated at the local level. Now, the state, I suppose, could pass a law saying you can't negotiate that, but really, if the city of X has negotiated that into their contracts, that's on them.
Yeah, I would think that would be part of a collective bargaining agreement.
It is, and I mean, again, we could pass a law that bans that, I suppose. But we haven't forced that on them. That's something they've done to themselves. And that's the kind of thing where I look at it and say, this, certain city councils, they don't want to take the responsibility. They want to put it back on us. And that's where that's where the politics come into play. At the end of the day, the cities and towns have to look out for their own fiscal futures, too.
Are you predicting there will be, again, I'm asking you to look into the crystal ball. Do you predict there will be some relaxation of some of those mandates this session?
I would certainly hope there would be. And I think we're going to, and we think we need to do something for the municipalities. Don't misunderstand me. I'm just saying that a lot of what you read or hear about is confusing because it's not as simple as it seems. It's not. The state system fix is actually simple by comparison.
How about you Republicans? You represent the leader of the Republicans in the House, and you caucus, of course, with the Republicans. Have you put together your own set of Republican items that you would like to keep high on the priority list this 2012 session?
Yeah, I said earlier that I thought that the municipal pension fix would probably be the most contentious issue or most important issue that we'll actually deal with as a body. But I think the most important issue we ought to be dealing with is the state's economy and our business climate. And the thing I've been saying over and over is to improve this state, and it would make a lot of our other problems go away, we need to improve the business climate and improve private sector job creation. To do that, that's a multifaceted type thing to do. We as Republicans are putting together a package of legislation that we intend to submit sometime in the next 4 to 6 weeks before the deadline in February to deal first and foremost with regulatory issues and also potentially with some of the tax structures and also with some of the other areas within government that we hear from the business community can be changed to make business easier to do.
Well, I heard just this morning, the morning of this taping, that maybe there's a little good news, that maybe the economy is improving, although slightly. The newest numbers indicate that we have the lowest unemployment rate in 3 years. Let's hope that's accurate, and let's hope it continues. Are you optimistic?
Well, two things. I'm an optimist by nature, so I'm always optimistic. But putting that aside, the lowest unemployment rate still is one of the highest in the country. The second thing is that unemployment number, and this is not just true in Rhode Island, it's true nationally, it's a bit deceptive because it doesn't count people who've given up looking for work.
Correct.
So I don't know what the real unemployment rate in this country is much higher than the reported unemployment rates. In politics, now that we're in a presidential election year, politics tends to play in how those numbers are used too.
You make a very good point because a lot of folks have given up.
Yeah, and they don't get counted in the rate. The bottom line is we have one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. And the reason we have one of the highest unemployment rates in the country is we're a very difficult state to do business in. But that's something we can change, and that's the point. We should all, Democrats, Republicans, everybody should be focused on changing that. You
folks in the General Assembly, though, have made a little progress in that category. You passed a package of bills not too long ago that was deemed business-friendly and was really aimed at helping promote small business in the Ocean State?
No, we have. And in fact, one of the things that I do think we've done in the tenure I've been here was the income tax reform that was passed in 2010. I think that was a good piece of legislation. And we did pass some small regulatory measures back in 2010 as well. I was on the Small Business Committee then. I remember dealing with those. But that's sort of the tip of the iceberg. We're actually working as Republicans. We've been, for the last several months while we've been out of session, working with some of the department heads and agencies to ask them, look, what do you think could be changed? I think even today as we're taping this, I think some of our people are meeting with DOT, for example, to go over some of their regulations. I know we've met with Department of Health and Human Services and others. There are a lot of things that can be done. It's not one thing. It's a lot of little things. There's a lot more that can be done.
It's interesting. You made me think of an old business principle that's taught in some business schools, management by walking around. If you go to department heads, as you're suggesting, and say, hey, what can we do here? How can we make this better? How can we run more efficiently? How can we be more lean? It's surprising what people will tell you that are in the trenches every day.
Yeah, I'll give you a classic example. Just last month, I had a conversation with a constituent of mine who's in the real estate business. He was working on getting a project approved down in Tiverton and was awaiting DEM approval. It was supposedly a fast-track proposal. It took them 6 months to approve it. They did finally approve it, but why did it take 6 months to approve it? It wasn't because they were missing things. Sometimes the applicants don't put the things in. Why did it take DEM 6 months to approve something that's going to create economic development in a town of Rhode Island? Doesn't make any sense.
That's very frustrating, and that's not a Republican or Democratic issue. I mean, that just makes people angry. It frustrates them, and sometimes if they get too beaten down, they say, what's the point?
Well, not just that, but they also give up. Or, more importantly, if you've got the option, if you are a multi-state developer or a multi-state business concern, and you hear stories like that, you're going to say, well, why should I open up business or why should I expand my facility in Rhode Island? Why not expand it even in Massachusetts or Connecticut or down south or somewhere else? That's the problem. It's a reputational thing. I have that same problem in the town that I live in. My town is known for not being business friendly, and it hurts us in our efforts to develop locally.
You know, I have this philosophy, and maybe I'm expecting a little too much, but I think every state's governor, they need to be a good salesperson. And there's an old sales axiom, you can't sell the steak without the sizzle, and I think who's ever in that position really needs to sell the merits of our state. We have so many great qualities here. We have trained and talented workers. We have a competent, skilled workforce. And, you know, I'm wondering if we've done enough of that.
Well, you're right. You can't sell the steak without the sizzle, but you can't sell just the sizzle. You have to have the steak. And the problem in Rhode Island is we have half a steak. You know, but we can create or build, to use your analogy, we can build a better steak in this state and then go out and sell it.
We'll soon be knee-deep in the whole budget process again, and there are already rumors circulating that the governor will plan in his new suggested budget to increase sales tax. I'm sure you've heard those rumors. What do you think, and what do you say to that concept? Because it's still a money in versus money out business.
If there was one thing that united all the Democrats and Republicans, or at least all the Republicans and most of the Democrats last session, it was rejection of the governor's original sales tax plan. If he submits anything like that again, I think it's going to be rejected by the same amount. I think that the governor's sales tax plan from last session was a very poor idea. And I hope that he would not waste everyone's time by submitting a new version of it.
So you think it's still a poor idea?
Yeah, I mean, but I do want to say this, though, because there's a difference between the idea of broadening the sales tax base but really lowering it. I don't mean raising it to try to bring in more revenue. I'm talking lowering it to make us competitive with other states, maybe down to 3%. That's a whole different idea, but that's not what the governor proposed. If the governor's proposing just broadening it to bring in more money while superficially lowering it, that's a whole different ballgame.
You know, again, this is kind of out of left field, but I always wondered why in Rhode Island you can buy a $7,000 Lynx coat and not pay any sales tax on that. I mean, obviously, if you're buying a $7,000 coat, I mean, you have some scarole.
Well, that's my point. I mean, our sales tax is riddled with exemptions. That's correct. And I've in the past been a co-sponsor of legislation that hasn't gone anywhere. The idea where we would broaden it to categories like that, but again, lower the rate. Right now it's 7%. If we would bring it down to 3%, make it revenue neutral, that's something I might get behind and support. That's a whole different thing from what the governor proposed. He was trying to broaden it, but not really lower it. And that's not good.
Some of the numbers I've heard about the deficit going into 2012 budget is around 120 million. Give or take $1 million or $2 million. That still means that you folks in the General Assembly are going to be faced with undoubtedly more cuts. And let's face it, everybody's program, everybody's project is important to them. That has to be a tough assignment, telling people that their noble cause, no matter how noble it might be, is going to face budgetary cuts.
If you are going to be in a position of authority, if you run for public office, whatever the office is, part of your job is telling people bad news. The bottom line is we spend too much money in this state. Now, we can argue about where to cut it, but we spend too much money. We don't have a taxing problem. We have a spending problem. And, you know, it's like in a household analogy. If you have a budget in your household and you're used to spending $100 a month on something every month and someone takes that money away, that's a hardship to you. But if you never had the $100 in the first place, or if you only had $50, you would have adjusted your budget and your priorities and how you operate to the 50 a long time ago. The same thing goes with state government. Government always starts with the baseline. Every government across this country seems to start with a baseline where you gave us X dollars for this program this year, so next year we need at least X to go forward. No, you don't. If you thought, what do you really need to function, you might find you need less than X. Now that gets back to the whole zero-based budgeting and everything else, but that's really what we need to look at. There's no reason we can't cut government in this state. It's absurd to say we can't.
Well, again, you're going to be looking at those kind of cuts, and for a lot of folks, it's always a very difficult bill to swallow. One of the ways that is being really talked about a great deal in this building in the coming year is generating revenue through expanded gambling. Most people think it's going to be something that's going to be very significant, and we're feeling pressure because some of our neighbors are getting ready to possibly do it. Your thoughts?
You know, it's funny. I think you and I talked about this the last time, maybe 7 or 8 months ago, and my thoughts are the same as they were then. Twin River is a casino. Now, people may or may not like gambling. They may or may not like casinos. They may or may not think casinos or gambling are the best way to do economic development. Bottom line is we have a casino at Twin River. It's an imperfect casino. It can be improved. If it needs to be improved to keep it and allow it to be competitive with our neighboring states, then we have an obligation, since it's such an important source of our revenue, whether we like it or not, to do that. So to the extent that there's going to be a proposal out there to support adding table games or expanding Twin River, I absolutely support that. And to the extent that they want to do the same thing in Newport Grand, I support that as well. That's a whole separate ballgame from saying, should we build casinos elsewhere, which I do not support.
Well, and that's an interesting observation, because your colleague, Representative Trillo, has come forward, and I think he makes an interesting case for utilizing the area at Quonset Point, being ideal for gambling, being a destination spot, expanding on the tourism in that part of our state. Do you think that he's ill-advised?
We have spent a lot of money as a state to develop Quonset Point into a business park and a destination for all kinds of good-paying private industry jobs, and that's what we should focus on creating there.
Could you do both?
I don't know if you could or not, but first of all, because of the slippage clauses with Twin River and Newport Grand, I think we would end up having to shut those down. I don't think it'd be a good idea for the state. And I don't think the people in North Kingstown want a casino at Quonset Point.
Well, and again, I think that if, I've heard, what is it, the third gambling right now, the third largest source?
Yeah, after the income tax and the sales tax.
Right, of revenue for our state. If Massachusetts moves forward, you folks in the General Assembly and the citizens of Rhode Island can kiss a good majority of that money goodbye.
And that's why I support the expansion of Twin River. And Newport if they want to go that way.
I wonder if, looking back in retrospect, back in 2006, we should have let the Narragansett Indians have their way in West Warwick.
The problem with the West
that would have been up and running years ago. The
problem with the West Warwick proposal was that the state was going to cut its share of the revenue substantially. I think it was down to about 20%, 25%, as opposed to 60%. And so that was I remember at the time, that was my big problem with it. If Twin River and Newport Grand, we get 60% of the revenue. That's huge. There's gambling, I mean, they can make money even paying the state that amount. We should let them expand. They're already existing.
I've made my feelings known for years. I'm what you would call maybe a recreational gambler. I'm not a big-time spender or anything like that, but it always just sticks in my craw when I go to Connecticut and I see so many Rhode Island license plates. And as you said, we have casinos now, but they're not really real casinos. What difference does it make if we add table games?
In my understanding of the casino business, I'm not an expert, but the table games bring in the bigger, the high rollers. It's not just a matter of bringing in table games. If you go to Twin River, and I've been there a couple of times, I live not far away, they have some very good restaurants there. They have some space for shows. They can bring in, conventions, that kind of thing. If they have the allure of the table games, it brings in the big money. The slots, casinos make a lot of their money on slots based on the return rates. But, most of the people play slots are the local people that come in, they stop in for the day or the evening. The real money comes when you bring people in as a destination and they spend money on other things.
Yeah, and you can bring in some whales that are really big gamblers from other states that want to try different casinos and want to sample different casinos. I think, there are a lot of folks out there like me that maybe want to make an evening out of it, have a dinner at one of the restaurants. And I don't live that far from the Twin River either. And have dinner, maybe gamble, listen to some music, relax, have a nice night out. And it is a nice facility. But you can't roll the bones, you can't shoot craps.
You can't play poker or whatever else.
You can't play poker. And again, I think that it would certainly make that attractive. And who knows, if it does happen, maybe these facilities ratchet it up a bit, maybe add a little expansion, do some renovation and improving, and then you get all sorts of a trickle-down effect with the increasing of jobs.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I support the expansion of the existing facilities.
Another big item that you folks dealt with and are still dealing with is redistricting. Capital TV has been covering all of the hearings that have taken place with regard to redistricting. How has that gone in your estimation?
Well, it depends on what your expectation is. I'm not going to do my, Claude Rains impression from Casablanca here. That I'm shocked to find there's politics in redistricting. Redistricting is a political process, no matter how you slice it, no matter how you do it. I know there's people out there, Common Cause says, well, it should be completely non-political. There's nothing that's non-political. But in politics, there's politics, and then there's unfair politics. There's clean hits and there's cheap shots, if you want to take a football analogy. And I think on a macro basis, understanding that and understanding it from a Republican perspective, we have a relatively small number of people here. On a macro basis, I think that the redistricting process, I was referring to the House, and I can't speak about the Senate, was fair. On a micro level, there's certain things I take issue with. There's still time to change things, so we'll see how that develops. But it is what it is. I mean, I'm not going to...
I'd like to hear that Claude Rains impersonation one day,
I
though.
can't do
I
that.
bet that's pretty...
I don't have a good French accent.
I bet that's pretty good. Yeah, it is. It's something that is required every 10 years, and again, it's going to be one of those things that you'll never, ever absolutely, positively satisfy every single person.
Well, you can't. I mean, you just can't. I mean, sometimes people, the nature of the district numbers change, and you can't do it. The question is, do you do it in a way that's fair and that makes sense? See, my big issue is this. Because you can't take politics out of the process, I don't have an issue if politics is part of a decision, is a factor in a decision. I have an issue when politics is the only factor in the decision.
You know, the next item, agenda item that we're going to talk about this day is another important issue that a lot of our viewers are concerned about. I was born in the city that founded General Motors, and the automobile business was always near and dear to our family's heart. And for many years, there was a saying that as General Motors goes, so goes the country. And when I moved here and found that there was a car tax, I had never experienced that before, and it struck me as a little unusual. In fact, a lot unusual. Representative McNamara, your colleague in the House, was sitting in that chair a couple of weeks ago, and he thinks that the system is unfair and needs to be fixed. Your thoughts about the car tax, and are there problems with it? Well,
my thoughts about the car tax, I hate the car tax. Let me say that right off the bat. Just in general, I hate it. I understand, I think the rationale for the car tax is particularly the urban areas where a lot of people are renters. In theory, they don't pay property taxes, so it's a way to get property taxes out of people who don't own property. But as we all know, renters do pay property taxes.
A portion of their rent is going to property tax.
So there's really no rational basis for the car tax, but like everything else, once it's in place and the cities are used to the revenue from it, it's hard for them to get rid of it. The problem that people are talking about now is something that's in the press now, but only a recent development, but I've been hearing about for a couple of years now, is the way the valuations are done. And they're not done in a rational way. They're based on I forget the valuation term as we sit here, but they're based on basically the highest possible value of the car,
well, yeah,
regardless of what the car's worth.
They're based on a way that allows communities to gouge.
Yeah, well, beyond that, it hits certain groups and certain types of automobiles harder than others. For example, tradespeople who drive, most of them have stripped down trucks. If you're buying a truck for your business, you're not going to put the bells and whistles. But that truck gets taxed as though it's the high-end pickup truck.
And it's in Bristol condition with low mileage.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, when Chairman McNamara was on, he told a story that was close to his family. His daughter owned some old hand-me-down vehicle, some Dodge or something, and it was evaluated at $2,000. He said he'd be lucky to get $300 or $400 for it.
Oh, he's right.
And I think people genuinely would be concerned about that.
I've heard that same story over and over from people in my district. So I haven't looked at the specifics of Representative McNamara's proposed legislation, but the concept I'm definitely behind. Here's the thing. If you change the way the valuation process is done, some people may end up paying more, some may pay less, but if the whole process is more fair, it makes a tax that people hate to begin with a little easier to swallow.
That's the key word that you said. If people sense that it's fair and they're paying tax on a true and reasonable value of their car, and they have a mechanism maybe that if indeed someone falls in the cracks and they think that they're still being gouged, that there's a remedy for that. I think that has to be there too.
Yeah, no, I agree. The system needs to be fixed in some way.
Well, listen, I wish you good luck on that, because a lot of people are concerned, and a lot of people feel that they're overpaying on that particular tax. You've developed a real good reputation with responding and communicating with your constituents. You're kind of a high-tech guy, and you're very savvy with the internet and what it has to offer today to the business community. When you communicate with the folks at the street level, be it through technology or face-to-face meetings at the local coffee shop, what are your constituents telling you?
In the last 6 months since we got out of session, except for the special session, the two big issues that have come, well, three. Number one, some of the car tax stuff we're talking about, the economy, the jobs. I mean, that's been an ongoing, that's not new. And then, of course, the pension reform legislation. A lot of the communications I had in the last 3-4 months were about the pension reform. And a lot of them, one of the things I found interesting was there's a lot of misinformation out there about what the pension reform bill does and does not do. I found that a lot of union members, and particularly people who are active employees, it had not been communicated to them exactly what the legislation did. A lot of them were concerned that it affected them worse than it actually does. And so I've spent a lot of my time sort of trying to educate people, saying, listen, here's what will really happen. What's your situation? Here's how this affects you. And I think people have been very, they've been, I don't say enjoyed that, but they have appreciated that.
Yeah, and you know, while there's been this gridlock in Washington, I think it's refreshing to see us get something done. The leadership in the House and Senate, along with the treasurer and governor, who kind of all got on the same page. And the real proof of the pudding's in the eating. And the Brown University poll said the majority of Rhode Island citizens, a significant majority, supported what you folks did in the General Assembly.
You know, when a gun is held to your head, you don't have a lot of choice. We reached that point where we as a state had to act. And it's interesting because even a lot of, you would think, if you listen to some of the rhetoric, that all the public employees hate this legislation. That's not the case. I wouldn't say they like it, but once most of them begin to understand how it affects them, they've come to appreciate the need for it and that it's being done in as fair a process as possible.
Well, I think what proves your point there is the margin of the poll of Brown University. It wasn't close. I mean, it was pretty substantial. So not every organized labor person could have just positively hated it and have that kind of a poll result.
They also may have disapproved of it in a poll, but understood that it needs to be done. You know, it's one thing to say, well, I don't like it, but I know it had to be done, versus I hate it and it shouldn't have happened.
Well, you know, it gets back to what you said earlier. When you take on a responsibility like this, sometimes you have to be the bearer of bad news and you have to speak candidly to people. And I think one of the things that all of you folks that were involved in that process can get high marks on is the way you communicated the seriousness of the issue. I think that people came away understanding the gravity of the situation.
The best example I gave, I said on the House floor, was this. If we didn't act, just this year alone, the average property tax bill in Burrillville, average, would have gone up by $300 next year. Let's say you're retired, you just retired, you have the average state pension of $25,000. The COLA that you're giving up is $750 next year. But you're paying $300 in property tax to get $750 back. Meanwhile, your neighbors who aren't collecting any of this are paying more than it doesn't make any sense. I mean, that's a little oversimplified, but that's the bottom line. People are not losing as much as they think they are because of the tax increases that would be necessary to sustain the existing system we had.
Yeah, I thought the treasurer, I liked her line about, you know, this is really a math problem. And and it really was. And I think that, you know, when people, when citizens look to elected officials, they want leadership and they want to be communicated to. And obviously you spend a lot of time with your constituents doing just that. And again, a lot of these problems we've discussed that exist here today would improve with an improved economy.
Oh, absolutely. I've said it all along. Look, if you have more private sector job creation, you're going to have more taxes flowing into the system, and you won't have as much squabbling about where to spend the money. In fact, you might even be able to cut taxes, which is what I'd like to see happen.
Now, in the 40 seconds we have remaining, priority number one for House Minority Leader Brian Newberry in the 2012 session. You personally, legislatively, what do you want to get done?
I want to see action taken that will improve the private sector job creation climate, if that's a good phrase to use, in this state. I want to see regulatory reform. I want to see us adjust our tax system, and I want to see us cut the state budget and cut some of the unnecessary spending. That's not only the top priority, it really should be the only priority. The pension fix factors into that as well.
Well, irrespective of politics, one thing that we can always count on with you is you're a good communicator. I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise and thoughts with us here today, and I wish you and your colleagues, not only in the Republican caucus, but the entire General Assembly, the very best in 2012.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million to you, too, for watching. My name is Dave Barber, and of course, you heard it straight from the Gavel.